surfaces covered with rubble, twisted lumps of metal and concrete. What have you found since you've been on the river tonight?
Oh, one hell of a mess at the moment. We've taken in about 8 survivors ourselves.
A complete span was ripped out of the bridge by the 11,000-ton freighter Lake Illawarra, now lying at the bottom of the River Derwent.
Just on the other side, we can still see the lights burning of one of the two cars that was lucky enough to avoid dropping into the river when the bridge collapsed there.
That car was Frank Manley's Monaro. Frank had been driving his family home to Cambridge from the Huon Valley.
The missus and I spotted the white line missing.
He hit the brakes and the car skidded on an angle towards the gap, catching on its edge.
The car was like a seesaw. The car was rocking back and forth like that.
When Frank opened the wide driver's door, most of the space below the opening was the drop to the river below. He had to swing himself towards the back of the car to escape.
It's a scratch on the roof where I had my hand up, and the steel watchband put a scratch on the roof.
Murray Ling was in the other car left hanging over the gap.
And I must have slowed down pretty dramatically, and a guy just flashed past me, and he was only feet in front of me, and he just disappeared. And that's when I hit the anchors.
Murray Ling stopped about 20 feet back.
Alan Townsend has heard more personal stories than most. He recorded oral histories in 2012 for a major exhibition. Police officer Phil Butler told Alan how it felt that night, being on the bridge with its tensioning cable severed.
The bridge basically, once it was disconnected from the other side, had started to sway. And he said he could feel it moving, probably 6 inches either direction under his feet.
12 people died that night, 5 in cars that went over the edge, and 7 crew members of the Lake Illawarra. The Marine Board of Inquiry found Captain Boleslav Pelk guilty of careless navigation.
Perhaps emotionally, this has never seemed an appropriate penalty to many who were affected by the tragedy.
It's now 8 months, all but a day, since the Lake Illawarra crashed into the bridge, leaving this 130-metre gap, which has cut Hobart in half.
In 1975, around a third of Hobartians lived here on the eastern shore, but the city's development was very lopsided. All of its hospitals and most of its schools, businesses and even GPs were over on the other side of the river. What had been a few minutes' drive from Clarence to the city centre turned into an hour-and-a-half detour over the Bridgewater Bridge. Essential services could use a punt at Risdon, though it was considered totally inadequate. Some worked out their own alternative transport.
I found out that I could do it quicker this way.
How long does it take you?
It took an hour and a quarter from Park Beach.
Ferry services were quickly set up, but there was no supervision for school children, and wait times were lengthy.
A report released last week revealed that household squabbles had increased to such an extent that some marriages were being threatened.
We need many more ferries and means of getting across than we've got at the moment. This is quite hopeless.
You're going on the ferry with Mummy, are you? Would you like to go by yourself?
The ferries and their queues became a form of social engagement with both positive and negative effects.
Because they were built as tourism ferries, they still had bars on board. So a lot of people would get on the ferry fully intending to go home and have a few drinks and just not get off the boat.
Author Jenny Williams met her future husband on the ferry.
Whilst you were in the queue, you were looking here and there, you were looking how the women are dressed, how the men are dressed, and Brian was in front of me.
Over time, the bridge disaster changed the face of the largely residential eastern shore.
The banks and the big businesses started to buy up old places.
The unplanned bridge closure was used as an opportunity to add a 5th lane, using the pedestrian walkway space. New paths were built projecting outwards on steel cantilevers.
On Saturday, October the 8th, 1977, after nearly 2.5 years of reconstruction, the Tasman Bridge was reopened.
Half a century on, a fear of crossing the Tasman Bridge remains for some Hobart residents.
I had nightmares for a while. Got to live with it, I suppose, and I don't go much on going over it.
Selina Ross, ABC News.